Thank you so much, and thank you to Slide Master for getting my slides up. I appreciate it. All right, am I good back there on the camera mic and everything? Sweet, okay. I'm so glad I have a mic to hold, because otherwise I do a lot of hand talking. I didn't realize how much hand talking I did until I accidentally got a webcam with AI. And so it thinks that I'm trying to communicate with it when I do hand things, and it randomly zooms in on me. It's very distressing. So luckily I don't have to worry about that today. So as Casey said, I'm here from Lacey Consulting Services to talk about breaking down boundaries between the E and the S in ESG. And we're going to think about that through a lens of environmental justice. So a little bit about me. I have an undergrad in environmental science and an MBA from Leeds School of Business in Boulder. So I've been here a couple of years. And I have been in sustainability and environmental work for more than 10 years now. That's my pup, because I live in Colorado, so it's legally required that I have a dog. But she has tiny, short little legs, so that's how we hike. And I'm big into birds, so these are some of the birds that I've worked with throughout my various careers, rehabilitating raptors, working at a zoo and training education birds, the parrots and the chickens there, lots of different stuff. So I've kind of bounced around, and it's given me a great view of the way that lots of different organizations and companies can approach environmental and social work. So where I'm coming from, Lacey Consulting Services, these are our main three pillars, and I particularly want to point out our justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We use the shortening JEDI, because it's simple and it rolls off the tongue, and also our founder is a nerd. No shade, I am too, so it's cool. But that's what we use, so when I'm saying JEDI, that's what I'm talking about. That's our acronym. And then we also do social science and conservation planning. So as we talk about JEDI, as we progress through this, just want to make sure that we're kind of talking in the same terms here. So when I'm talking about justice, that's our foundational principle, what we're trying to work towards with the E, the D, and the I, which dismantles systems and structures that are creating inequality. The ways that we do that are through equity, acknowledging differences and giving people different resources based on the need rather than the same resource for everybody across the board. Diversity reflects our differences that impact every aspect of our lives. We're going to chat some more about those different experiences and perspectives. And inclusion, which we feel is not real inclusion until you have given that sense of belonging and acceptance. Just leaving the door open and then saying, why is nobody coming? We opened the door, is not the same as setting a place at the table and making people feel comfortable and included and serving food that they want to eat. So thinking about that gap between some of our inclusion approaches versus actual belonging. So to dive in on environmental justice, which as Casey said is a huge topic, we're just going to touch on some of it today. Here's a definition from the US EPA, which I will read, sorry. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. This one's a mouthful, but it's about to get more complicated. So I'd like to consider going beyond the word regardless and thinking more about the equity that we discussed on the JEDI slide and saying it shouldn't be the same for everybody. Instead, we need to acknowledge where greater social and environmental harms have been done so that then we can take actions based on who has the greater needs. So, a new definition from Dr. Robert Bullard, who is widely considered to be the father of environmental justice. Instead, this embraces the principle that all people and communities have a right to equal protection and equal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. And I want to point out one of the sentences lower in the second paragraph. Zip code is still the most potent predictor of an individual's health and well-being. So this is a very important aspect of what we're talking about. And when we think about environmental justice, something that we frequently say, which I firmly believe to be true, is that environmental issues are social issues, and social issues are environmental issues. We cannot extract them from each other. If one community is not sure about where its children are going to get food tomorrow, they do not care what is being dumped in the lake behind their community. They cannot. They do not have space for it. They have to feed children. And if that means creating more pollution, then they are going to do it. But likewise, that river way down the line may be polluting a space that another disadvantaged community lives in. It's not their fault that that river is polluted, and it's not their fault that nobody else wants to live there or wants to spend the money to buy that land because it's polluted. And so now those people are living out a social harm, and it's because of an environmental issue that they have no factor in causing. So I really want to consider that lens a couple of different times throughout this presentation as how environmental and social issues feed into each other and are, in fact, both the same at the same time. So can you raise your hand for me if you've heard of intersectionality? Awesome. All right, we're on the same page. So I'm going to try to teach y'all a couple of new words today. I hope we'll get something that nobody knows yet. We'll see. So when we're talking about intersectionality, we're thinking about how multiple identities come together to impact the way a person is treated and the opportunities that they are offered. So when we think about, I can give you myself as an example because that's safe. I am white, and so I have privileges that are associated with whiteness, but I'm also transgender and chronically ill and physically disabled. And so all three of those parts of my identity interact to impact the way that I am treated and viewed in society. And so, for example, I grew up in Texas. If I went back to Texas now and lived there, I would likely receive substandard care from many doctors, not across the board, but particularly in rural areas, for my chronic illnesses and disabilities, not because those doctors are not good at treating them, but because they disagree with the fact that I am transgender. And so those two aspects of my identity have intersected to impact how society treats me and what resources I have access to. One of my first new words for everyone here today, a word that I think really sums up some intersectionality and is super important to know, is called misogynoir. And this is the specific prejudice against Black women, cisgender or transgender, that impacts their ability to function in society and is a treatment that is distinct from white women and from Black men. And so there's my first vocab word. Write that one down. There might be a quiz later. Misogynoir, from noir, the French word for black. Any questions so far? You can also save them up for the end. But I want to gather. Okay. So here is an excellent visualization of different types of identities. This is also an important way to look at diversity, coming back to that Jedi slide again. So when we think about diversity, we frequently tend to think about just the things we can see. We can say, you are a different race from me, and that is diversity. You are a different gender from me, and that is diversity. But there are lots of different kinds of diversity. And all of those different kinds of diverse identities also have an impact on how your power and your privilege is tangible in the spaces around you, and whether the people around you have the ability to take that power away from you. And so the likelihood is that no one will fall entirely in the center ring, and no one will fall entirely in the external ring, but because of the way your different identities intersect, you will have access to different resources, opportunities, and types of power. So I love maps. I'm a big maps person. So hopefully these will be interesting to y'all as well, because I think just like a picture can tell 1,000 words, a map, a really well-made map with a good key, can maybe tell 10,000. So we're going to look at first, this is our environmental economic damages. So this is a predictor of the impact, the economic impact that environmental disasters and climate change is likely to cause. I believe estimated for approximately 10 years out. So you can see where this is focused. It's a pretty clear set of boundaries for who we expect to have the most impact. And then we're going to look at our life expectancy at birth for the United States Census tracts. So again, we've got some notable little bubbles. We've got a pretty distinct set of regions that are set out from each other, and red is lower, blue is much higher life expectancy. Take a minute for that one, and now I want y'all to take a moment and in your mind guess at what this might be a map of. Just take a second, think about it. Would anybody like to vocalize a guess? I won't force you.
Number of parks? Ethnicity?
There it is. Racial and ethnic groups by county. Some good guesses. So I've got all three of them up here so that you can compare, because these maps line up really, really well. I definitely, do I have a laser pointer? I do. Okay. So I remember when I first was inspecting these maps and I found this life expectancy one, I said, boy, there's a little bubble over here. I wonder what that is. It's reservations. So that's our indigenous populations, which are very notably lower life expectancy at birth. So there's a lot of things that we can learn from these maps. All of them are intertwined. All of these maps impact each other, and they have causal outcomes based on who people are, where they live, creates the standard of living that they are going to be within for their entire life. So we talked some about race and ethnicity, but we've got some others. So here's my second vocab word for you. GSRM. This is my favorite of the many acronyms for LGBTQ. GSRM stands for Gender, Sexual, and Romantic Minorities. I like this word because you don't have to keep adding letters. Anybody who's not cishet, they're in there. So I highly encourage you to try this one out. It's the best one that I found so far. So this includes social aspects, right? Access to healthcare, housing, mental health resources. And when you do not have those, just like we were talking about earlier, you're much less likely to be able to participate in environmental activism, to make big changes in your life around environmentalism and conservation. And this community tends to be much more susceptible to the impacts of climate change, either due to unsafe or unstable housing situations, due to medical issues, all of those kinds of things. Again, I'll use myself as an example. There is a law in Tennessee right now that is very anti-drag performance, but it is extremely loosely worded in such a way that being transgender in public is an offense for which you could be fined or put in jail, because it bans imitation of the opposite sex, essentially. Which means that if people had things that they would like my organization to work on in Tennessee, I cannot go there. I cannot go do that work. That social issue is impacting our ability as an organization to impact the environmental work that needs to be done there. So this is another way that this comes together. And then further beyond race and ethnicity is the disabled community. Here's my third vocab word for you, eco-ableism. This is a great set, it's a phrase, but it's an excellent word for when non-disabled environmental activists fail to understand that solutions might make some people with disabilities face difficulties. So a huge example of this that we've just hit recently is the plastic straw situation. I think it's fantastic, and I'm 100% behind the fact that we're switching away from plastic straws to paper, to compostable, to metal straws, whatever it takes. But there are certain things, including straws, that absolutely must be single-use disposable for people in the disabled community. Plastic straws are an example. There are people who cannot physically use other alternatives to straws due to muscle issues in the mouth, due to difficulty around drinking things such that they do need a straw. But for example, if they were given a metal straw, it would risk biting down on it and injuring their teeth. And so there are things that we frequently don't think about when we are not disabled. That it's very easy to say, well, that's the environmental problem, so we're going to get rid of that, and now we're set. And this often leaves behind people in the disabled community. So I am not out here to advocate for bringing back all the plastic straws and throwing them off of cruise ships. I am just saying that we do need to remember that there are unintended consequences of the actions that we take, and this can be felt even when you're thinking about different packaging, right? If you sell a consumer product and, okay, we're trying to move away from plastic packaging, fantastic. What would this look like to somebody who only has one hand? Can they access our packaging? Can they get to our product? What would this look like for somebody who does not have significant grip strength? Can they still use this product? All of these kinds of things weigh in to those social issues, and it's another of those intersections between those two issues. So when we think about where environmentalism is coming from, we have a lot of faces that look like this. Are in the United States, in America, the conservation movement was founded by a lot of older white male hunters specifically. And all of those aspects of their identities have colored the way that we think about environmentalism and the way that we assign blame when we decide that something is not working around our environmentalism as well. And so we can also see that reflected in, these are the heads of the US EPA since it has been founded. So it took a while to get to women, it took much longer to get to people of color. And 2021 was the first male person of color to head the United States EPA after 50 years of the existence of that organization. And that also has an impact. Just like people who are not disabled are not very likely to, on their own, come to the conclusion, oh, some single-use plastics are important, people who are not in various communities who do not hold these identities are going to have a harder time understanding the needs of these various communities, both from a social point of view and from an environmental point of view. And so bringing in people who are diverse is the key to reaching through and understanding what those problems are and finding a way to break through. So I think this slide is probably one of the more important takeaways from today. When we think about environmentalism as focusing on individual action, we are showing our privilege and impacting people who don't always have a choice. So when we think about sustainability, we have to think about systemic change rather than individual action. This is really hard for us in the United States. We're very individualist. We're like, I drive a Prius now, so I'm good. I did it, that was my job, and I fixed it. But that's not A, something that everyone can do, and it's not B, going to solve the whole problem. So the talent in this room and in this building today is the kind of thing that we need to actually make meaningful environmental change and to make it while acknowledging the social impacts that that environmental change can have. And so thinking at the company level, at the organizational level, what are the systemic changes that we can make? Even from the example, if anybody was in the last panel on the third floor, talking about Coca-Cola moving from green plastic packaging to clear plastic packaging because of the impact of the green versus the clear plastic on the recycling process. That's a level of systemic change that individual consumers can't achieve and probably wouldn't understand how to impact even if they knew about it. But it's something that at the organizational level we can consider, and we can say, here's a change that we can make that's going to impact 10,000 consumers over the next year or two. And that's so much bigger a difference than people remembering to bring their metal fork to work so they don't have to use a plastic one. So this is a way, thinking about the systemic change, is a way to impact those environmental problems without exacerbating social issues, which is one of the bigger challenges. I'll give you an example, a client that we've worked with who's working on environmental justice work. So they want to do some projects in rural Mexico, and the people who live in rural Mexico are not their specific audience, but they do live there, and that's important. And so they have asked us and our social scientists to go and help them understand the workings in those rural communities and how they can do their work without creating more social harm. So the communities in rural Mexico are called ejidos, and they are run by collective community of the members of the ejido called ejidatarios. And so those groups are the ones that we came and spoke to and said, okay, we'd like to come in and do this project. This group would like to come work here. What do you need? And they said, we need to not die from drug violence. We need to not be abducted into slave work and sex work. This is not even on our radar, right? This is not an issue that we can think about because we are thinking about the social issues right now. And so for us to bring them to a space where they could work together, the very first thing that we needed to do was find common goals and say, okay, this organization is not going to be able to solve these problems, but the important thing is that we're also not going to make them worse. And so working together, we can say, okay, here's a common goal. If the ejido falls apart too much, it will be sold to a corporation that will raise the community to the ground and plant non-native crops. Nobody wins in that scenario, right? The ejido is gone, the people in the community have to move somewhere else, and the organization who wants to work with them can't. No one is left to work with them. And so we say, okay, now we found common ground. We do not want this ejido to fail, to fall apart, to be sold. What are some of the causes of that? Well, one of the biggest ones is outmigration. Due to social issues, due to women not having very much power, and due to young people not having very much power, and not feeling generally accepted, and not seeing anywhere that they're going to grow into. So now this organization says, okay, that's something we can have an impact on. Now we can come in and we can work with you to create jobs and help you solve your social issues and help and empower you as a community to work on this thing with us. Even though you're not the one who we're selling this to, this isn't a product for you, we can work alongside you through our common goals, through those common values, and reach a point where we haven't caused social harm, and instead we have even improved the social outlook, even though that's entirely not in their scope, right? Their scope is not about save communities in rural Mexico. You're not going to find that on their mission statement. It is nowhere on their pages. But by working with them and addressing the problems that they think are important, those social issues can now be addressed in a responsible way. So I want to bring out some of our new environmentalists. So we saw some faces of earlier. The faces at the beginning are very bearded, rugged, white men, Theodore Roosevelt type environmentalists. But there are more people doing this work today than ever before, and there are people with new voices. I want to particularly shout out Virginia Rose, who's the founder of Birdability, which is an organization that helps get people with physical disabilities of all kinds outdoors and give them access to birding. And as part of that shout out, I would say check out their website. They have a crowdsourced map of accessible outdoor areas, which anyone can contribute to. And so if there's anyone in your life who says, I can't go outside, I really want to go outside, but I don't have access to it for whatever reason, check out Birdability, check out their map. It's super cool. It includes everything about disabled parking spaces, toilets, grade of the paths, everything about that. So there's lots of really cool work. If you live here in Colorado and you aren't following Parker McMullen Bushman, aka Queen Work, yeah, please do. She's very cool. She has lots of cool, exciting things to say. That's KWEENWERK, Queen Work. Look her up on Instagram, she's awesome. She probably has TikTok, I'm too old for that. So I don't know. Christian Cooper, some of y'all may recognize as the black man who was birding in Central Park in New York and was accosted by a white woman with her dog. So he's very cool also, doing a lot of amazing work. I highly recommend checking out all of these people if you want to learn about ways that environmentalism is happening without causing or deepening social harms. So when we think about what's next, moving forward, thinking about how we're going to go away from here, I would really like y'all to think about what environmental justice means for you, both in your personal life, but also in the larger impacts that you have access to. What would this look like if you implemented it at work? How are you doing ESG? Do you ever combine those letters? Do you ever think about, okay, we're doing this work, what's the social impact of my environmental work? What's the social impact of the governance side that I'm working on? Because these cannot operate in vacuums. We all are in this together, and everything that we do is going to have ripple effects. So finding and tracking those unintended consequences that come of making changes that are 100% well-intentioned is absolutely critical to be able to move forward and to be sustainable in that ESG work. And so I'd love to think about, just for yourselves inside, what is something that I can do on my team that would move this work forward, that would take this inclusivity and that would move forward our social goals? Do I know 100% off the top of my head what our social goals are as an organization, even if we are an organization that makes oat bars? Do I know? Am I confident about what's happening in that sphere? And if I'm not, why not? Who do I talk to about that? And if I am, what am I doing? What is my team doing? And how have I incorporated that sustainability goal into my everyday work? So I'm going to put this up here. Good news, that QR code totally doesn't work, so don't scan it. But that's my email. It does work, and that's our organization's website. So I would be happy to chat with people. If questions come up way later, please feel free to email me. I also do all kinds of different talks like this, so hit me up. Other than that, I'm going to open it up for some questions here. We already have one. Thank you. Yes, please.
Christine Hager.
Just, yeah.
Oh. Thank you.
Thanks for quoting my example earlier. I appreciate that. No, great presentation. I wanted to ask, I'm working with this one organization. They pick up litter in waterways a lot of times. That is in underserved communities. And you talked about this, like how are companies seeing this intersection? How do you recommend companies think about setting targets or commitments in this space? Because you get worried about making the wrong commitment, I think, right? Or using the wrong language, or being too specific but not specific enough. So anyway, any coaching you can do on that?
Absolutely. I totally agree that that's a challenge, figuring out where we're going, what's the plan. And so the biggest thing that I would say is figure out who your audience is and go talk to them, right? Just like with the Ajitos, this organization started by saying, we know what we need to fix, we know what we need to do, we'll just go down there and do it. And then as soon as they started doing that, they said, I don't think we know what to do. I think I've realized that this was wrong, and that we need to talk to people. So who are you trying to help? What are your social goals about? Are they, and just even really honing in on, are we helping young people? Are we trying to help people of color? Are we working with economically disadvantaged communities? Being specific about who your target is for your social goals, and then talking to them, right? And then, and I highly recommend paying people for their time. This is also something that can be really challenging. For example, trying to bring people in to town halls or get surveys filled out or anything. Paying people for that time will help you get that communication going, and will help people not feel taken advantage of, to have it be a completely one-sided relationship where they come to you and they say, here's all the things that I'm struggling with right now, and you're like, cool, write that down. So figuring out how those relationships can be built in a more genuine way, both through paying people for their time, but also through having meals with people, really great way to build up that kind of trust. And then, yes, asking what do people need, where do you want to be in 5 years, and then figuring out what's achievable on your end within your budget and your scope and your mission to help them achieve. Does that help? Great question. What else we got? Yes.
So I've seen a lot of definitions of family communities over the years, but I haven't seen queer and trans people put on there. It looks like your data is implying that that's changing. Is that something that you're seeing, or is that more like they're on there because of the intersectionality?
In terms of environmental harms?
Trans people be considered friendly communities?
Oh, yes, I think that is changing. I think due to the current political climate, I guess I would call it, and the systematic harms that have continued to impact the queer and trans community. I think that's really what's influencing that, is that, yes, that is becoming the norm, that is becoming, because the proportion of unhoused people who are queer and trans is continuing to go up, and that is hugely correlated with increased issues from environmental damages, and increased trauma and harm from climate change and from major climate events. That is also a really huge predictor of how people are going to be able to weather the coming years and the coming transitions. Yeah, good question. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. And as you were talking, especially when you were doing the example around the straws and around, packaging, and you include this decision making as a part of your process, I could feel myself trying to be the agent of change in a conversation with stakeholders at my corporate company. And in a world where I'm trying to not let perfect be the enemy of good, and I can already feel them, you give a great example of if we're changing packaging, and now the packaging is not as accessible for people who only have one hand. And then it'd be like, well, we picked this other thing, but some people have an allergy to that, so now we can't, I feel like you could always go to the end, it feels like we're always going to leave someone out. And then I think enter the shame part, where the people who are like, well, then we shouldn't talk about this because that idea someone's going to be left out. So I would love to know how you incorporate that into the work of yes, we should do something and it'll never be perfect and we don't have to feel shame, but we should keep striving to do better.
Absolutely.
No big deal. Very light.
I got this. It's going to be great.
Thank you.
I super appreciate that, because I think that's huge. letting the perfect be the enemy of the good is something that we've probably all in this room struggled with at some point in our lives. I also like the term analysis paralysis, where we think about something and we write down plans and we think about it more and we never do it because there's so much to think about. And that's going to be sort of an ongoing balancing act that we all have to do in our personal and our professional lives. And so acknowledging nothing's going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, and that's okay. I think my answer to this would be similar to my answer to the first question, which is talk to your audience, but specifically to go beyond that and say, okay, who in our audience is going to be the most impacted? Who do we not always talk to? Who are we not seeing in the focus groups who we are pretty sure are using our product, right? And so if your product is likely to be inaccessible to wheelchair users, but you never expected wheelchair users to want or need your product, if you make stair railings, like, you're good. You don't need to ask wheelchair users what they think of your stair railings, right? And so acknowledging when that's going to be important and when it's not is totally fine. And so really just giving communities an opportunity to respond and say, hey, okay, this is how a change that we want to make. And that also comes into just having diversity in product testers, right? And not just, racial diversity, but diversity of all different kinds. That's going to have an impact on whether you catch those kinds of things, right? And it's a similar thing that, video game bug testers do, right? Is if you have 5 dudes, like, there's only going to be so many things that they can test. And as soon as you release it to the public, there's going to be 1,000 people who are like, I figured out how to break it in the first hour that it was released. And that's going to happen, and it's okay, right? But then the question is, what do you do when somebody comes to you and says, hey, this doesn't work for us, and you've put a year of R&D into this new packaging, right? That's the terrifying thing. And so having a plan in advance for what's the threshold of this is okay and we can run with it versus this is not okay and we've disenfranchised somebody and we have to change now. Figuring out in advance where that is so that you're not panicking when people come to you and say, this isn't working, that's going to be really big. And it's also going to show that you have thought about what your impact is going to be on different communities, and that you knew that you couldn't plan for every single eventuality, but you had an overall contingency plan in place of something might go wrong, what is going to happen next? Super good question. I really appreciate that. Who else? Oh boy. We got lots of time, y'all.
So I think for many of us, we're trying to understand, like, what does success look like in this space? Do you have a case study to share of a company who has maybe engaged with the community or taken on an initiative, or even something more local here in Colorado, to kind of plant some seeds? I'm trying to use a lot of plant some seeds to advance this work, or organizations that are doing really well in this space.
Yeah, I wanna think about that, because I definitely want to call them out. Christiane, I'll tag you in if I have to, if you have ideas. My colleague Christiane is in the back of the room. She's awesome. Please talk to her. She's great. So it's one of the reasons I think it's a challenge to say this is working, is first and foremost because we mostly notice things when they break. And secondly, because if it's working, that's an ongoing term, right? We don't do a thing and then it's done. For most of us in here, like, we intend to have a career in what we're doing for quite a long time, and things will continue to change and continue to evolve and continue to get better. Honestly, I think that the question of the straws is a good one, right? There's a great restaurant in Old Town Arvada, So Radish. If you're ever in the area, it's the best. They're all vegan. They're very good. They have a secret arcade in the back, so check it out. And they're one of the groups who initially switched all the way off of plastic straws because, environmental work is high on the radar, right? That's why they're full vegan restaurant. And so they were immediately like, great, it's paper straws from here on out. Here we are, we're good, we've got the paper straws. And then people pushed back and said, I can't, I want to be able to come here and I physically cannot drink liquids in your space. I need plastic straws to be able to do that. Your paper straws come apart in my mouth based on the things that I do while I'm drinking that I don't have control over. I can't eat here now. And they said, got it. And they pivoted real quick and just keep like 2 boxes of plastic straws back in the kitchen that people can request. And so it's things as simple as that, as acknowledging when you've tried to make, a lot of times it'll be tried to make that environmental change and immediately realized an unexpected social outcome and then switched to really make that impact significantly better. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll keep thinking about it. Anybody else? I don't mind letting you out early. It's allowed. You can be the first ones in line for snack time. Yay.
Any ideas, so like this morning, Kevin, I believe, was talking about storytelling, and obviously, especially if you're in a for-profit entity, you need to be providing that, revenue case for why you're doing it. But then there's also the challenge of if you're doing good in a community, not having that feel like, okay, now I'm going to put your picture up on the website and use you. There's a lot of sensitivity around making sure you're telling that story in an authentic way, but if it's coming on your corporate page versus in the authentic voice of someone from that community, do you have suggestions for kind of how you balance that, where you're obviously like, it's a give and take. We want to do good, but we're also trying to sell a story here, but we don't want to make you feel like we're only here because we're trying to make ourselves look good and put your face on a poster.
Absolutely, yeah, and that can be a real challenge because at the end of the day, to get the people above you to do anything, right, you're going to have to be able to say, here's how it's going to impact us, here's what we're going to get out of it. So I think what you mentioned would be one of my first recommendations is let them tell it, get your community to tell it in their voice. And that requires an amount of trust on your side and on the side of your marketing team to say, these people might not say 100% things that we want them to say. They might have words about who we are and who interacted with them, and you gotta take that risk. It's a risk worth taking, and it shows trust in that community, and it also is going to show everybody else through that trust that you are being authentic with this community. And so truly having that be part of the agreement, saying, hey, we'd love to film a 2-minute clip of you and put it on our website of how this process went. We would love, if you're a writer, to have something written down. We would love for an after-school group to create some children's art about this, so that we can talk about this, the impact that we've had through this. And you will also learn more about the impact that you've had through the stories that they tell rather than the stories that you tell, because something that you may not have thought was an important aspect of that collaboration might come out in that storytelling. So I think that's part of it. And then I think the other part of it is to talk about your own motivations, not just to talk about the impacts. And this is a trap that almost all organizations fall into with long-term projects, is that we say, okay, here's a 3-year project, and in 3 years we're going to have something beautiful that we can tell our donors about, that we can tell our funders about, and we can put it on the website, and we can make a beautiful package, and it'll all be done. But if nobody hears from you for those 3 years, they're going to be like, what have y'all, where are you? What's happening, right? And so learning to tell a story when it's not done yet is a big challenge. But it can, again, show that authenticity and be really worth it when it comes to actually communicating about what you're doing. Sometimes it can be very scary to acknowledge mistakes, but that's another thing that can build up that trust and that rapport with your audience, is to say, here's something that we're trying to do. Here was a misstep that we made, which is why you haven't heard from us in a while, but here's how we're fixing it, and here's where we're going. And so rather than waiting until the very end to try to tell that story and then putting a bow on it, letting that story grow organically over time and telling it whenever you have a cool benchmark to talk about, rather than just, we finished it and it's perfect now. Any other questions? That was a great one, thank you. All right, thank you all so much.